Hello, guys, gals, non-binary pals. Welcome to my YouTube channel. As you can see in the thumbnail, I read a lot of books this month, and not even all of them are featured in the thumbnail. So let's get started. First, at the tail end of Poetry Month, April was National Poetry Month here in the States, I read 3 poems by Hannah Sullivan. This won the T.S. Eliot Award for Best Poetry of 2018, probably, and it was 3 long poems about a lot of different things, and I don't remember a lot of it, but I enjoyed it. I read this a month ago. Next was White Rose by Kip Wilson. I got this in my Independent Bookstore Day haul. This was blurb by Mackenzie Wilson, which is what brought my attention to it. It is a novel in verse, so it's written in poetry about a resistance in Nazi Germany in World War II. It's told from the perspective of a young woman who was part of that resistance and helped distribute pamphlets speaking out against the government. It made me think kind of like, what am I doing under the current administration and how am I helping to rise up and resist? And if you are thinking about that and your place and your responsibility in politics, I would give that a read. It's a very quick read. I read it in a day because it's in verse. Next, I read Rafe by Rebecca Witherspoon. Rebecca Witherspoon is a Black romance author. This was described as an extremely fluffy novel, and it is that. It's fairly short. It is about a male nanny, a buff male nanny, who becomes the live-in nanny for the twin girls of a Black heart surgeon. There isn't a lot of conflict. It's just people like talking through the issues and being really good communicators and being super good with children. I read that in like a day. It was super fun. Now we're getting into the Asian American Heritage reads. May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month in the US, so I tried to read some novels by Asian authors. First was, where do I put this? Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho. Zen Cho is Malaysian, living in London. This book has a fairly low rating on Goodreads, but don't go off the rating. Most people rate it low, I think because of the prose style. If you like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I haven't read, or like Pride and Prejudice, it's that language. And I think that is off-putting for people, but I really loved it, and I also love the diversity in this book. The 2 point of view characters are a Black man and a half Indian woman, and I really loved the romance. It's got some really fun magic systems, some great female characters, and I highly recommend this book. Short synopsis: a Black man named Zachariah is made the sorcerer to the Crown of London. A lot of white men are very angry about this until a half-Indian woman comes along who's even more powerful and kind of bends all of society to her will. I loved her, and so should you. Next, I read Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. It is by a Korean author, and it's about Koreans living in Japan from the 30s to the 80s, and there are so many things that I learned that are just really shitty about Koreans living in Japan. 3rd and 4th generation Japanese Koreans, not considered citizens until, gosh, I don't know when, because it's not covered in this book, but probably the 90s, early 2000s. And I know there's a long history of racism, specifically Korean racism in Japan. I had no idea it was this bad, but this book, Pachinko, is all about a Korean family. They start out in Korea and then move to Japan over the course of the novel. Pachinko, if you don't know, is a kind of gambling machine, and most pachinko parlors in Japan are run by Koreans, and the novel is kind of about fate and like the wheel of life being rigged against you, but still moving forward. It's also obviously about family. It was very good. Next, I read Full Fathom 5 by Max Gladstone. This is a novel in the craft sequence. The craft sequence was written and published out of order. The 3rd book chronologically was the first book that was written. I haven't finished the whole series yet. I've read 3, 2, and 5 because that's the order that they go in, and they've been really good. They're kind of like parts of society that you wouldn't think to make magic, so like the finance sector or lawyers, insurance, offshore banking. I feel like I understood this book and this series more now that I have a full-time job and I'm kind of working with some of these systems more. But this book specifically was about a trans Hawaiian woman, or fantasy Hawaii, and then a young refugee who's also living on fantasy Hawaii, and they are trying to solve a mystery of a murdered god. Max Gladstone is great at descriptions and at writing action scenes. His action scenes involve like finance. They're so cool. One of the most unique world building ever, and I can't wait to read the rest of it. Next, Proper English by K.J. Charles. This was K.J. Charles's first F/F romance novel, well, novella. This was a prequel to her Agatha Christie-esque Edwardian mystery novel called Think of England. I haven't read that one yet because I just bought it, but then I saw that K.J. Charles was coming out with this novella and that it could be read alone, and I was like, yep, bye. I didn't know it was coming out until like 2 days beforehand. This is about a murder that happens during a shooting party in an isolated English country house. It's very cute. It's fairly short. Can't say much more than that. Next was Forbidden by Beverly Jenkins. I listened to this on audiobook. I listened to the third book in this series on audiobook, Tempest, last month. It focuses equally on the romance as it does on the slice of life stuff in this series, which I think is great. I think sometimes you just need to slow down and like read a slice of life Western. These series are Western. They're set in post-Civil War Reconstruction / moving into the nadir era of American history. This book is about a black woman who is rescued by a rich man in a local town who is white passing. He was born a slave, but he was the son of a slave owner and a slave, and he's used his white passing to become very rich and influential within the town, but that also means that he is unable to make friends within the black community. And then this black woman comes along and it's like, oh gosh, to be with her I might have to like come out as black. It's very slow, but sometimes you just need fluff, and Beverly Jenkins is the queen of romance. Next, I read Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray. This is the third in the Diviners series. Oh man, this book had me on the edge of my seat. Taught me something new about writing friends. Oh man, stuff goes down in this book. There were some great action scenes. Now that I'm caught up, I have to wait like 7 months for The King of Crows, the fourth book in this series, to come out. This series is amazing. One of the not few, but one of the YA series that I will recommend because it doesn't have high school in it. But that brings me to my biggest gripe with this series. When do these characters go to school? Who knows? This is about some kids, just crazy kids, living in New York in the 20s who all have magical powers. They all have different magical powers. They don't all hide their magical powers, which is great. It's not like the central conflict doesn't come from them hiding it. It actually comes from them being open about their powers and then like public backlash. They're kind of like Jazz Age X-Men, but there's not enough helpful adult authority figures, which is another gripe, but this book was action-packed. It explored a lot of characters that I wanted it to, so highly recommended. Next was a nonfiction book that I've been meaning to read for a while, The Library Book by Susan Orlean. It follows a fire that broke out in the LA Public Library in 1986 and the efforts to conserve and rebuild that library, and also a history of libraries itself. And then kind of interstitial with that is a biography of the man who was accused of starting the fire and kind of a questioning of whether he started it or not. As a book lover, if you love books, which you probably do because you watch this channel, you would love this book. It's a love letter to libraries, and it taught me a lot about libraries and the services they provide for the community, a lot of homeless help and outreach, and all the other things they do. Libraries are great. This book was great. Next was a reread. This was the first volume of Stand Still, Stay Silent by Mina Sundberg. I talked about this series in my Winter Reads video. It's post-apocalyptic Nordic webcomic. It's beautiful, and it's got magic. It's super cool. I forgot how slow the first volume is. Things really pick up in the second volume, but it's cool to read it in physical form because I got it from the library. Oh, this began my week of Bujold. I don't think I've talked about the Penric and Desdemona series on this channel, but the Penric and Desdemona series of novellas are by Lois McMaster Bujold. They take place in her World of the Five Gods series. Other books include The Curse of Chalion, Paladin of Souls, and The Hallowed Hunt. This is about a wonderful, wonderful young man named Penric who is, he's not possessed, by a demon, but he has a demon in his head, and she has the personalities of the 12 other women that she's been in before. So he's her first male writer, they're called, and having this demon allows him to do magic. He also just like talks to himself because she talks using his voice. She cares about him so much, and he cares about her so much, and it's beautiful. So I read in 1 week, I listened to on audio, Penric's Fox, Penric's Mission, Mira's Last Dance, and The Prisoner of Limnos. Penric's Mission, oh my god, it had everything I wanted in a book. It had action, it had female point of view, it had found family, it had a very polite young man. Penric is just so nice. He's like the perfect example of non-toxic masculinity. I love him so much. Go check out the Penric and Desdemona novellas. You can buy them all on Amazon. Probably the whole series for the price of 1 book. They're so good. Oh my gosh. So that was 4. I also read The Satipur Moonstone by Sudhu Talmasi. This is the sequel to The Widows of Malabar Hill, which I read earlier this year. It wasn't as good as the first one, but it still was great. I talked about it in my last video. Oh yeah, I talked about it in my last video because I got it for my birthday book haul. I didn't talk about the romance as much. I love me a romance where they can't be together, so it's like kind of like forbidden. Parveen Mystery, the main character, is married, but she's estranged, like legally estranged from her husband because he's a total dick and douchebag. We all hate him, but that means she can't get married ever again. So, like, morally, from her, like, morals, like, she doesn't want to be involved with a guy because she won't be able to marry him. But this guy named Colin, they'd be so good together, but she can't marry him. Oh my god. Anyway, next I read A Matter of Oaths by Helen S. Wright. Ignore this cover. The 2 characters are supposed to be people of color. It's a whitewash cover, and so I'll throw it in the trash. Anyway, this was an 80s sci-fi book. Oh my gosh, I should do a 20th century femme sci-fi fantasy video on this. This was a fairly, not simple, but a fairly short book about this. It's told from 2 perspectives. One's a man named Rafe, whose memory was wiped 10 years ago because he broke his oath as a space pilot that he took when he became a pilot. One is told from the point of view of his captain, who is a older woman of color who's been captaining for a long time, and she's kind of a chess master. And they're trying to figure out why Rafe's memory was wiped and what he has to do with the 2 immortal emperors that run this universe. There's a lot going on in a very short amount of time. I found that it was just okay. What drew me to this book was that Rafe is gay and he has a gay relationship in this book. No big deal is made out of it. They're just pretty cute. Yeah, it was fine. I'm glad I read it because it was good to see confirmed queer characters in an 80s sci-fi. Most recent book that I finished, Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I talked about this in my belated birthday book haul. I just had to read it right away because it's been recommended so highly. I already want to reread it. There's something about it that's just very compelling. Like I said in that last video, it's about the son of the first female president of the US and an alternate universe Prince of England falling in love. They're both great. Alex, the president's son, is the PV character for all of this. He's kind of clueless. He doesn't realize that he is bi until a significant amount of the way through this book. It's kind of enemies to lovers, but it's also about like politics and it's about a lot of things. You should just read it and love it and reread it. What I'm reading right now, Foreigner by C.J. Sherry. You think it's gonna be this centuries-long generational ship story, but it's actually court politics with aliens. It's very cool. It's not going where I thought it was, so it's kind of subverting my expectations. I don't know if it's necessarily in a good way, but I am planning on finishing it. And then, let's see if I have the strength to lift this. And the Band Played On by Randy Schultz. I gotta bring the mood down now. This is a extremely comprehensive, if incomplete, saga of the AIDS crisis, at least from the late 70s to 1987 when this book came out. If you know anything about history, you'll know that the AIDS epidemic did not end in 1987, so this book kind of doesn't have much closure. Also, Randy Schultz, the author, had AIDS when he was writing it. He passed away a few years after this book came out. It's proving to be extremely good so far. Randy Schultz was a journalist whose permanent beat for the San Francisco, I think, chronicler for a San Francisco newspaper, his full-time job was covering the AIDS crisis, because as you can imagine, San Francisco being an epicenter of the queer community, a lot of people died of AIDS in San Francisco. So it's written in a journalistic style and not necessarily like a researchy academic style, which makes it very readable, but gosh, it's hard to get through. I'm learning a lot. I'm crying a lot. I think it's going to be a really good thing to know. One of the darker sides of queer history, but also something that needs to be learned about. Probably won't finish any more than the ones I've mentioned. Yeah, I've got a few cool ideas for videos starring my roommates coming up. Also the Pride videos that I teased. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!